Live, a Merrimos Media production. Today we are speaking with the authors of The Power of Peers, How the Company You Keep Drives Leadership, Growth, and Success by Leon Shapiro and Leo Bottary. We have both of them here today. Leo Bottary is the Vice President of Peer Influence for Vistage Worldwide, and Leon Shapiro is the former CEO and current member of the Vistage Board of Directors. Today also happens to be Pub Day for Power of Peers, so congratulations to you both on that. That is so exciting. And we are so happy to have you here on such a busy day, so thank you for taking the time out. Today we have you both, and quite honestly, I want to congratulate you because Amazon, even though today is Pub Day, Amazon already has some crazy 5-star reviews. 97% of everyone is rating the book pretty high, so that's amazing, and another congratulations on that. Tell me both, whoever wants to take the floor first, what prompted you to write The Power of Peers?
Okay, well, I'll take that. I experienced what it was like as CEO to feel lonely at the top. And as CEO of Vistage, it took me almost a year to really figure out that I was surrounded by everyone, my management team, my board, mentors. Everyone had an interest, an vested interest in my role as CEO. And it takes a while for people to really come to that fact. And until I joined a peer group myself and experienced what it was like to have a place that you can go and sit with a dozen or 15 other people who have sat in your seat, understand what you're facing, and be able to share your experiences, your issues, your problem, and gain the benefit of those 15 people. Until I experienced that, and when I experienced that, I was motivated to share this and write this book for all of the other CEOs and business leaders and executives out there who have not had the opportunity to experience it. And so when I met Leo, who was working on this issue, and we came together, it was an immediate connection where we both said to ourselves, we have to share this powerful concept with others out there and everyone else who has not had this opportunity. It is one of the most time-proven techniques and methodologies of really improving yourself as a leader that has ever existed. And as we go through in the book, under certain conditions, it is really something incredibly powerful. So it was my own experience and Leo's work that came together to share this.
So interesting.
You know, if you think about it, there are thousands of books out there about leadership, hundreds more on followership, and very few about the people that stand beside us. And we thought that our peers, especially in the business and education space, that spending some time talking about how valuable they are, how important they are to our success, both personally and professionally, was of real value.
Absolutely. So how would you define peer advantage? It's something you talk about in the book. How is it an effective method for CEOs and other leaders who kind of struggle with isolation?
Sure. I mean, you think about it, right? We've experienced peer influence our whole life. Our parents cared about who we hung around with as kids. We've had people in our lives who have, certainly lifted us up. They've dragged us down. They've held us at bay sometimes. And it really doesn't change, as we get older. Our peers matter a whole lot. And what's interesting is peer influence is such a pervasive part of our lives, both in obvious ways and in ways that aren't so obvious. So we often don't really give it a second thought. And in this book, we basically say, imagine if you gave it a second thought. What would that look like if you were more selective, more strategic, or more structured about how you engaged your peers? And the beauty is we don't have to guess at the answer to that question because people for decades now have participated in this CEO peer advisory groups to great benefit. It was just an opportunity for us, I think, to give language around that in a way that would give more CEOs and more business owners and business leaders, really at all levels, the information that will, I think, help them evaluate this as just a wonderful opportunity for their executive development.
Absolutely. And what about to say a global organization? How is that peer advantage super important?
Well, it's really important. We address this a bit through Edward Hall's work in the book around culture, about high context cultures and low context cultures. And what's interesting is if we think peer influence is a big deal in the United States, which is by and large a lower context culture as far as Hall's models is concerned, in higher context cultures in Asia and the Middle East, and many other countries around the world, peers matter even more. So what's interesting is no matter what country you live in the world, peer influence and peer advantage has a real place in terms of helping people be more successful, both in their business and in their life.
Absolutely.
Just to add on to what you said, it is just a higher form of what we already do day to day. So we interact with people, we share with our and in other countries and cultures around the world, this is very common. And so peer advantage is simply saying, as a leader, as a CEO, as a business owner, imagine how powerful that could be if it had some of the formal structure to it and if you actually engaged in it intentionally and purposefully. But it's something that's very common. Instead of anything to do, it is simply something that is in addition to something else.
Right.
Oh, having a little hard time hearing you there. So I did want to say we do have The Power of Peers right here. So definitely you can grab your copy today. But in The Power of Peers, how the company you keep drives leadership, growth, and success. You introduce in the first chapter a peerless leader. What is that? Can you speak to that a little bit and tell the audience what you mean by it?
Sure, I'll start a little bit. You know, Stanford Graduate School of Business did a study in 2013 that said 2/3 of CEOs are not seeking any outside leadership advice. They are the peerless leaders we're talking about, right? So I think that's probably a pretty good definition of it. If there are CEOs out there that don't have a peer or peer group to talk to, then they are in that place where they feel isolated and they feel, quite frankly, very alone.
Absolutely.
And add to that, as a CEO, the analogy is almost like driving with people. And to lead an organization and be a leader without input and involvement from your peers, this means you're missing out on the opportunity, regardless of any formal coaching, formal relationship with a mentor. We talk about the book is just so much powerful and more helpful to you as a leader, that even with those engagement in some way.
Absolutely, definitely. So also in the first chapter, you give some basic guidelines for CEOs to follow, kind of when they should, how they select their peer group, and what peer group they should be joining. Can you talk a little bit about that process?
Sure. So I think one of the things that is really essential when you're looking at a peer group, so let's say, for example, I was interested in running a marathon. So I might select peers that wanted to do the same thing, maybe have done the same thing. That way I can get people who will encourage me. I get people who can give me training tips and advice. I get people around me who will encourage me about whether I made that training run that I was supposed to that day. CEOs do very much the same thing. So you want to find a group of people who really share the same goals and aspirations you have and the same commitment and willingness to do that. I think that's a really essential part of it. I think the second part, though, is a group experience is not for everyone either necessarily. And I mean that from the perspective of you've got to be willing to give as much as you are to receive. I mean, you are there. It's checking your ego at the door. It's a spirit of generosity about wanting to help others, knowing that if you give, you will get that back many, many fold from the people in the group. So I think finding a group where you've got that comfort level, they share your goals, and where you know that you can be a good fit from a standpoint of being willing to give to that group, I think is really essential.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I would just add to that. finding a group with motivated, moving forward. And what we go into in the book is sort of a formal structure around that. Pretty straightforward, simple, but it is critical. And it takes your mere peer influence, and that's where you get to peer. That becomes a critical thing.
Okay. I'm having a bit of a hard time hearing you, Leon. I'm not sure if the mic is maybe going out or just not coming through completely. I'm not sure if I'm the only one, but I'm just not. I just wanted to alert everyone just so that I'm not sure if I'm the only one having that technical problem, but I just want to talk about being lonely at the top. You write that sometimes CEOs tend to feel this way. How is that? You know, you assume the CEO kind of has it all and they're at the top of the world, but yeah, maybe it's a lonely place to sit at the throne. How do they deal with this and the people who surround them?
Yep. So let me share my own personal experience of how I felt looking at the top. I mentioned that at the beginning. Are you able to hear me okay?
You go in and out. I can hear Leo okay, but I'm having a little hard time with you, Leon.
Okay, so why don't you go over to Leo? He'll start. I'll just step up for a second, fix my mic, and come back and add on.
I can actually hear you good now.
Oh, you can?
Okay.
All right, well
Yep.
then, there we go. Let me try that. So I alluded to a personal experience in my opening remarks. And the way it manifested itself for me was I all of a sudden realized as I was faced with a really tough strategic problem prior to a board meeting, that all the advice I was getting from my board members, from my management team, from my spouse, from anyone I was speaking to, was they had a vested interest in the outcome. And so all of a sudden I was faced with a decision that I seemingly couldn't make in the face of an abundance of information and an abundance of advice from all of those around me. And I recognized at that point that what I really lacked was the ability for me to be completely open and honest in my conversations that I was having with them, and that I needed a place where I could speak about the issue and really voice my real challenges with it. For example, if I spoke to my board, I tended to downplay it a little and not to make it as big of an issue as it was. If I spoke to my management team, they were trying to do the thing that they thought I wanted, and so we weren't having a true, open, honest conversation. And it wasn't until I got into my own group that I realized and recognized that having 15 people around the table whose only interest is in helping you reach the right decision that you believe as a leader is the right thing, have no vested interest in the outcome, are prepared to challenge you when they feel as though something you're saying doesn't make sense, leads you to an answer that you may have had within you all along, but weren't able to bring out to the forefront. And so that feeling of loneliness in the face of an apparent abundance of people and information is the contradictory thing that many leaders face. And until you really recognize why you feel lonely in the face of so many people being around you, it's hard to do something about it, and that's what we try to encourage in the book.
Yeah, I think in addition to that stake in the outcome, there's also the issue of the perspective that is brought, right? So if you have someone from marketing or HR or legal, they tend to see issues through that lens. Their experience is not really rooted in making the decision for an entire organization. So when you're around other CEOs who really understand what that's all about and what that means and all of the considerations that have to go into that, they're not worried about what sacred cows you might have in your organization or the politics of things or any of that either. So once they can give you that perspective, it's just very, very valuable when you can get that.
Absolutely. And beyond isolation, what are some other reasons that a CEO would consider joining a peer group?
I'll start with diversity of perspective is certainly one. So one of the interesting questions that many CEOs have when they are going to be part of a group where the members are outside of their company and outside of their industry sector is how are these people possibly going to help me? You know, if I'm the CEO of a hospital, for example, and I'm in a group with the CEO of a bank or a small manufacturing firm or ad agency, what could I possibly, get from this? And what they quickly learn is how many shared challenges they have, which is a very, very important piece. But you get the diversity of perspectives from all of those different industries, so that what could be a commonplace practice in one industry is unheard of elsewhere, but yet could be really applicable. So they really learn from one another and share that. And what makes it different, and again, as Leon mentioned, this is an and, it's not an or. We encourage people, obviously, go to business school, hire an executive coach, read books, do all of these things. But one of the things that a single coach can't give you is the perspective of 16 other people. Right. It's just math, right? So I just think that's an essential part of that diversity of perspective that a CEO can get from people who know what it's like to make decisions for an entire organization is really of extraordinary value.
Yeah, and I've found during those interactions that sometimes the least likely candidates will offer up a perspective on how they've interpreted and viewed what you've just said that is so far from left field and yet so spot on and on point that it's amazing. So you may be in a service industry and someone who's in a manufacturing industry will comment and talk to you about something that they've experienced that all of a sudden, because they're looking at it from a completely different perspective, you sit there and you say, wow, I'd never really thought of that. Or maybe this is how people in my organization are hearing what I'm saying. And that diversity is incredibly powerful.
Absolutely. So before we dig a little deeper, because I do want to get into those 5 essential factors of peer advantage, but I want to talk a little about Vistage International. For those who are listening that aren't totally familiar with Vistage, they are the world's largest CEO membership organization, which brings together successful CEOs, executives, and business owners into these private peer advisory groups we've been talking about. Can you tell us a little more about what Vistage is doing to help all of these businesses around the world with this peer advisory?
Yeah, sure. So Vistage has approximately 20,000 members around the world in various peer groups. And so it's a pretty large group of people. It has probably 4 or 5 times that in terms of alumni, because the company has been around for almost 60 years. To be perfectly fair, though, the book itself is really about the concept. Yeah. And certainly while Vistage is a very large organization, probably the largest member-based peer organization out there, the book is intended to really encourage people to understand the concept and the process. And so we talk about it from that perspective. To get people involved in peer groups and to get them to experience peer advantage. For obvious reasons, we think Vistage has one of the most attractive opportunities out there, and they certainly cover the globe in terms of availability, and therefore those 20,000 members offer incredible diverse perspectives. And so it's a great answer and not the only answer.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Vistage reinforcement loop, I want to talk about this. We're talking trust, caring, challenge, growth. Why is this important to the peer group?
There are different ways that people enforce group norms, if you will. One of them can be shared values. Another can be, there are groups, for example, that actually have members, read and sign an agreement at the end of each year, so they understand how these groups work, what's important, and what are the values and practices that are essential there. One of the things we do at Vistage is we believe that trust is really the foundation, right? I mean, without trust, you really don't have a whole lot. Once people start to trust one another and learn more about each other, they begin to really care about one another. They don't have a stake in the outcome like we talked about, but they do care about one another's success. And when you have that taking place, now all of a sudden you can challenge people from a place of caring. So if I were to challenge you on something, but I'm only doing it because I want you to be successful, then that really feels okay. I'm going to be much more receptive to that type of challenge when I know where it comes from. And when we go through that process and we experience the kind of growth, whether it's growth in our business, growth in ourselves, growth personally, it creates that reinforcing loop now that I'm going to trust more, right? So, and I'm going to care more, and I'm going to challenge more, and I'm going to grow more, and it's a constant cycle there that, I believe is certainly essential and central to what we do at Vistage, but I would suggest also that it's a very big ingredient for other groups as well and why they function so well.
Right.
Yeah, and those, in fairness, are the four founding values of Vistage. Yeah. And so they really work well in a group, and they create the accountability that we talk about in the book, and they give the possibility of really engaging at a much deeper level and getting the most you can out of your peers. And as Leo so clearly articulated, you need those four things to reinforce each other to get a deeper, richer experience.
Absolutely. Those 5 factors I was just talking about, they're essential to great group experience, and you put so much on those in the book. So select the right peers, create a safe environment, utilize a smart guide, foster valuable interactions, and be accountable. Can you talk a little bit to each of those?
Sure. We're going to go into that a little more deeply. Surrounding yourself with the right people, we talked a bit about that, right? Where it becomes, if you've got people with shared beliefs, shared goals, shared aspirations, surround yourself with those people who have that commitment. Secondly, of course, the safe environment is so critical. You've got to be in a place where people are going to listen more than they talk. They're going to learn instead of judge. They're going to realize that they're in a place among peers where they're there to learn from one another and gain the experience of one another. So it is a place where you need to have an environment where people can completely be open and vulnerable and where confidentiality is sacrosanct. I mean, the idea of what happens in that meeting stays in that meeting, and that's what gives people a comfort level that they need. Third, we talk about utilizing a smart guide, and what we're really talking about there, of course, is effective leadership of a group. How do we bring that group together so that they're working well with one another and maximizing their experience, both in the group meeting and outside the meeting experience as well. Fourth, when we get into fostering valuable interaction, that is so essential because you can give someone all the emotional safety in the whole world, but what they need to know also intellectually is that there's a process that will help us get to the heart of a matter that can help me either deal with a problem or identify a promising opportunity, whatever that may happen to be. So having that process in the intellectual front is very, very important. And finally, as Leon alluded to earlier as well, accountability. Having a culture of we are going to do what we say we're going to do. But it's kind of interesting in terms of how that's arrived at. So unlike a consulting firm that, for example, may give you a report and tell you, here are our recommendations for going forward. As the CEO, when you are hearing what you're hearing in a meeting, you're basically asked to come up with what resonated with you. What are the kinds of things that you want to do to move forward? So the solution really, in many respects, comes from me. I own that solution, and then I commit to the group. Here's how I'm going to move going forward. And what's interesting about that whole experience, as was shared with me, by many people who lead these groups, is that you not only get incredible insights that give you the kind of perspective that you need, but the group also really gives you the courage to act. And that is so powerful. That you know that you've got the support of that room. You know that you have gone through and vetted that issue in every way possible so that you can walk out of that meeting and feeling like, I know exactly what I need to do going forward.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely, Leo. And having experienced that myself in groups as Leo has, the power is incredible. And so those 5 factors become critical. They're not complicated. They're very straightforward. They are all reinforcing and critical ingredients to the process. And so, for example, a smart guide is really a neutral facilitator who can make sure that the conversation is flowing, will ensure that no one is holding back. It's really important to make sure in these groups that you actually share your experience. If you see something, say something. And so a smart guide will make sure that that happens. And will sort of identify where the conversation is going and has the ability to recognize where someone is sort of going off point and utilizing what we all use as leaders, which is avoidance. I don't really want to talk about the real issue that's underneath this. So I talk about everything else. And a smart guide really helps bring that stuff out.
Absolutely. You know, what I find interesting about these essential factors is that much like a peer group where, say, everyone makes up the whole, so without one, you're not completed, these 5 items, without one, you need one to have the other. And without one of these factors, you don't have that big circle to make that up. So it's interesting how they play against each other.
They do. They're truly an ensemble from that perspective. I mean, they stand alone in terms of being very distinct individually, but to your point, and I think it was very well said, how they work together and they really depend on one another in order for peer advantage to be possible.
Absolutely. So you also have a peer engagement model, which is made up of network, connect, optimize, and accelerate. Can you tell us how that model works specifically?
Sure. I mean, when we talk about people, we connect in life, right? We go to business events where we make connections with people. We post a LinkedIn profile. We may seek out information from people who, if I want to buy a car, for example, I want to find out from other people who've driven that car, you know, how is it? You know, what is that like? I know what the manufacturer is going to tell me. I know what Car and Driver or other magazines are going to say maybe about it, but you've driven that car. And what's fascinating about that is if I'm looking to do that, I don't know any of these people, but I will trust the prevailing sentiment of that group. And I think that's how connections can be very, very powerful. When we talk about networking, it's much more selective and purposeful in many respects. So it may be that I'm looking for a job, or I'm looking for a business partner or financing for my company or whatever. So now I'm going to seek out particular individuals who I may know to be able to help me with that task. So when we talk about connecting and networking, they are very much individual pursuits. When we move to optimizing and accelerating, which are the next two as part of the model, optimizing really becomes like what great sports teams do, right? We've got March Madness going on right now on the men's and women's side. And these teams who are in that Sweet 16 and moving on to the tournament have optimized. They are incredible in terms of what takes place on that floor and what they're prepared for in terms of the game. We talk about like the Blue Angels, for example, that perfect flight that we see as a perfect flight, they know otherwise. They have debriefs at the end of every one of those flights because they know that the margin of error is extremely small. The consequences can be catastrophic, of course. So they are so wired into making sure that they are chasing, perfection in the pursuit of excellence. And then finally, accelerate becomes what top CEOs and business owners do when they step outside of their companies, step outside of their industry sector, participate in a group environment where they get that diversity of perspective and all that we've touched on here. So that model, we felt, is not only powerful from the perspective of taking people up through connecting, networking, optimizing, accelerating, but actually the more we thought about it, the more we also realized that if you're a CEO and with your time as limited as it is, spend the time where you're going to get the greatest value for it. So for the CEO, you might participate in those ways you engage your peer in the opposite order. Accelerate first. You want to be that CEO who is engaging with other CEOs. Take what you learn from that interaction so you can optimize inside your own organization. Then become a more effective networker and extend your reach by connecting. So that, I think, may seem somewhat counterintuitive in many respects, but the more you think about it from a CEO's perspective, probably one of the more powerful outcomes that we hope people gain from the book.
Yeah.
Leo, I'm really surprised you mentioned the NCAA, given Seton Hall's performance.
Ouch.
But let me just add on to what Leo said, which is absolutely true. And again, it reinforces this concept of leaders are doing some or all of these at some point, and it's natural. And so accelerating that, where you really get to experience peer advantage, is just the next, taking it to the next level. And so what we feel as though we have uncovered and what we offer to leaders around the world is an opportunity to take what they already do and experience and do it at an accelerated rate. And the benefits there are just immense. They're incredible. And I really would encourage leaders to try this and engage in it because the rewards are fantastic.
Absolutely. We're coming to the end, unfortunately, but I do have a couple more questions. I want to discuss this idea of vulnerability because it seems like it should be obvious amongst CEOs, but I think we know, sometimes maybe things get in the way and a CEO just isn't comfortable allowing that element to push them even further. Can you talk about why it's necessary to be vulnerable? I know you talk about this in the book.
Yes, so look, I think it was Brene Brown that said vulnerability is the birthplace of creativity and innovation. And the truth of the matter is, as CEOs and as business leaders, we've learned our whole lives that we're supposed to know the answer to everything. And we're supposed to be strong and not weak. And so vulnerability falls into this category of appearing to be weak. The reality is the exact opposite.
Yeah.
And until you have that safe place to be able to be vulnerable and experience vulnerability, it's not until then that you understand the true power that that really gives you as a CEO. And so moving away from this misconceived concept that vulnerability is weakness into a place where vulnerability is actually strength is what a peer group can do for you. And so it's really important to go through that process, and we talk about this a lot in the book. True leaders, the really great leaders of our time, from politics to social leaders to business leaders, really understand that they need to be vulnerable in order to lead effectively and be that powerful leader.
Absolutely. What about, have you heard anything, maybe, I know the book is just out today, again, today's pub day, which is super exciting, but are there any success stories maybe from within Vistage or within your group that anyone's come to you and said, wow, this has been really changing and we've learned so much from it? Is there anything you can share with us?
One in particular, I think, is certainly Jay Steinfeld. It opens up one of the chapters later in the book, rather extraordinary story of both some personal tragedy and, having a very small business, having it evolve into what became blinds.com. And then over time, in fact, it was just this past year, I believe, he had this company that started off, just tiny. It was worth probably, I think it was doing close to $150 million in revenue by the time he sold it to Home Depot. So, and his group was with him every step of the way. And in large part, in the early days on that story, he fell into what a lot of CEOs who are new and trying to start their company, and when you don't have a big staff, and you think that your CEO means to be the chief everything officer. And, and part of what the group helped them do in terms of scaling that business was learn how to be a chief executive officer and not be the chief everything officer. Because if he was stuck in that space, he would never have grown that company to the way he did. And again, there was a lot of things going on both personally and professionally with him where the group just provided enormous support. And he remains a member of his group today. And I think a real testimony to how he feels about his members, the value he brings to them, and the value he knows he gets in return.
Wow.
Yeah, and there are just so many success stories. We go into some of them in the book, and we'll be talking about them in the coming months and years as we highlight them. I think one of the things I'd like to add to that is, we don't just talk about people becoming better leaders. This cycle of influence really goes back to inside the companies, when CEOs and leaders go back to their organizations, to their communities. And part of our motivation for doing this is really the gravy that we experience here, the way that people become better and affect all of those around them, and it has a roll-on influence. And it's incredibly intoxicating for us who are passionate about it to see that happening and to see how it improves not only company performance, but all other aspects of that leader's life and their communities.
So interesting. I can't thank you both enough for joining us today. It is pub day, so I know that your day is crazy, but taking the time out to talk about really such an important subject, and everyone, The Power of Peers, go grab it. It is out today. Thank you so much to both of you for joining and talking, and really, really interesting stuff. We really appreciate your time.
Well, thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Absolutely. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.